This One Piece moment was honestly pretty great to watch. Now, I have heard this line before, but I didn't know any of the context, so it was nice to see the added context. But I must say, I didn't know who this mysterious guy was when I made my last video. Since then, I've seen a few more episodes, so now I know he's the infamous Blackbeard, which definitely changed the way I looked at this scene and all of Luffy's past interactions with him. But even before knowing he was Blackbeard, when Luffy met him in the bar, I could kind of tell like they're setting him up like a potential adversary of Luffy's. Just because of how different they were, one person would say one thing, the other would say the opposite. So they were setting it up like, yeah, these two are going to be foes. But now learning that he's Blackbeard, it just adds so much context. Now I wasn't expecting he would be Blackbeard, partly because he doesn't have a beard. I mean, he's got a little bit of stubble, but it's a little misleading. Even Whitebeard doesn't really have a beard, he's got a mustache. It would be kind of like if Luffy didn't really have a straw hat, yet he was called Straw Hat Luffy. You're just a fraud. Okay, not entirely, but still. I think it is kind of a great introduction to the character of Blackbeard, because we've only heard certain things like Ace is looking for Blackbeard after he killed a member of the Whitebeard Pirates, he was part of the Whitebeard Pirates, and different things like that. So he's a fascinating person, but just running into him by chance in a bar like this was kind of funny, especially because Blackbeard may be a big guy, but he doesn't seem like he's the most powerful person just kind of looking at him. So in many ways, I like that parallel with Luffy. Now, Luffy's obviously a lot smaller, and I'm assuming they were probably the two strongest people in the bar in this entire town. And then you have these other pirates throwing around bounties. I don't know what Blackbeard's bounty is, but I imagine it's pretty high as well. But you have other pirates throwing around bounties like Bellamy, like, oh, I'm worth 55 million berries, or whatever it was, when in reality, they're underestimating these two people here. I mean, and Zoro and some of the others, but it's one of those lessons like never judge a book by its cover. But I even kind of like this idea that Luffy doesn't know it's Blackbeard, Blackbeard doesn't really know much about Luffy, and it's almost like having bombs strapped to these individuals, just knowing like you gotta be cautious with how you interact with the other one. And even when I think of that interaction with Luffy and the guy on the horse, you know, the weird guy on the horse who now I know is a member of the Blackbeard Pirates, I think that that's actually a pretty fitting analogy, at least that's the way I'm looking at it. I could be reading into it too much, but Luffy grabbed an apple, and he happened to grab the correct one. He was lucky. Some other guy wasn't, he blew up, but I almost see that whole interaction as much more symbolic as Luffy just going through this town, not really realizing like how lucky he's getting, because he even comes across as very dangerous individual like Blackbeard, especially by the way Ace was kind of talking about him. Yet he doesn't know, but it's just like one wrong move and things could have ended much worse. You had this whole other moment I talked about in the last video. It was difficult to watch, but it was still a great scene, which perfectly leads into this one, because that scene was all about Bellamy kind of taunting Luffy about dreams, like, oh, you believe in the One Piece, you believe in Sky Island, like you guys are a bunch of idiots, the age of dreaming is over. And obviously he and his pirates beat up Luffy and Zoro, but as hard as it was to watch, I like that Luffy basically looked at Bellamy like, this guy isn't even worth fighting. Some things just aren't worth fighting over. And the more I think about that scene, it appears to me like Luffy genuinely felt bad for this guy. Because Luffy cares immensely about dreams, his own dreams, other people's dreams, and he even throughout the story that I've seen so far has helped people achieve their dreams whenever he can. You even think back to Alabasta, like him coming across Toto and learning about Toto's dream in the desert to, you know, revive this oasis. And Luffy just started helping this guy dig for water without any sort of explanation because he's like, oh, that's your dream? Let me help you. So in Luffy's eyes, he probably saw a pathetic group of pirates, not because they weren't strong, but because they had no dreams. They had given up on their own dreams. And I think to Luffy, that's basically one of the worst things you can do. So now leading into this moment, Nami is dragging out a beat up Luffy and Zoro. And again, side note, Zoro is really loyal to Luffy because he didn't even question when Luffy told him, do not fight. He just went along with it. But Nami's kind of upset, and I can't blame her because she's wondering like, why didn't you guys fight? I know you guys could have beaten them up. Not to mention, she was also mocked because she wanted to learn about Sky Island, and they just laughed at her like, oh, you're an idiot. You believe in Sky Island. Like, you listen to a log post, nobody follows those things anymore. They're so faulty, like you guys don't know anything about the world. And as they're walking out, Blackbeard, who was listening in, just says the Sky Island does exist. Now I wonder if he actually knows it exists or if he simply believes it exists. Like maybe he's physically been there. Maybe he knows someone he trusts who's been there and says, yeah, it exists. Or maybe he simply believes that much in people's dreams that he's like, of course it has to exist because everything is possible. I'm not really sure. I kind of like the second explanation, like he just has to believe it exists. But even when he starts talking to Nami, who's still kind of upset that like her friends wouldn't fight back, he's like, your friends won that fight, you know. I watched this scene in the dub and the sub to kind of see if they would change up a word here and there. I will go and read it in the manga as well to see if maybe there's a detail that I missed. Like in the dub version, they add like your friends won the fight without throwing a punch. I think I kind of like that version a tiny bit more, but he's right, like they won that fight. And this whole moment is great because Blackbeard had listened to this whole thing, and he's talking about like this age that they're talking about where dreams don't exist, that dreams are over, it will never come. And then of course he says the famous line, people's dreams have no end. Now I must say, it is kind of interesting kind of knowing like Blackbeard, probably not a good guy, especially if Ace is trying to hunt him down for killing a former crewmate, not to mention Luffy and him being so vastly different. But here when I really look at Blackbeard and Luffy, at the core, they're both dreamers at heart. So the analogy that popped into my mind is they're two sides of the same coin. Like at the core, they're technically the same. They're both dreamers. They have these dreams that they're going for. But at the same time, they're so vastly different on face value. And Blackbeard is just going on and on about his dreams while everyone around is laughing and he's just like, let them mock. People mock the dreamers, but it's also that idea that dreamers are also the ones that change the world. And even in my last video when I talked about the last scene, that was hard to watch. This scene being directly after it made it so much easier to stomach because it was like, yeah, it's easy to mock the people with wacky dreams, but it's often those people who change the world. But I must say, the way Luffy acted in this whole moment was fascinating, and I definitely looked at it a little differently after learning this was Blackbeard, because Luffy was dead serious this whole scene, just staring at Blackbeard. He did not blink, which the more I thought about it, I was realizing this felt like a showdown, like who's gonna blink first, who's gonna look away first. And the way I kind of interpret it is that Luffy doesn't really know who Blackbeard is, Blackbeard doesn't really know who Luffy is, but yet both can kind of tell like there's more than meets the eye with the other one, and you gotta be a little cautious here. Because Luffy didn't even look away until Blackbeard walked away. I think even without knowing exactly who Blackbeard was, he could kind of sense like, this guy I gotta be cautious of. That's the way I kind of interpreted it. Now maybe I'm reading into it too much, maybe it's just he was looking at him like, yeah, I fully agree with you, but he was also kind of serious after just getting beat up. I don't know, I still kind of see it like he saw the threat that this guy posed and was like, I'm not looking away until you do. But one of the things I definitely took away from this scene that I also kind of took away from the first scene is, despite the fact that Blackbeard went on about dreams will have no end, is that this whole interaction was setting up yet again these two aren't really going to be friends. Like, Luffy didn't seem at all endearing towards this guy. When there were a few moments where I thought like, oh, maybe Luffy would chime in, like, yeah, you're right, I agree, or something like that, Luffy didn't look at him friendly at all. But anyway, Blackbeard walks away, he wishes them luck with finding Sky Island. But I gotta say, I thought that this scene was very revealing. Obviously, like that quote about dreams I thought was great, but really more so what I took away from this scene was there seemed to be this battle going on between Luffy and Blackbeard, and they were just looking at each other, kind of measuring the other one, sizing the other one up. But anyway, I'm curious on what your thoughts are on this particular moment. As I mentioned, I had heard the quote before, and I know it was associated with One Piece, but I'm curious on what your thoughts are. Obviously spoiler free, but if you like this video and you want to see more, please like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.